everyone in person, but now I've unmuted myself. Can I get a quick thumbs up if people can hear me online? Yeah, got a few. Great. I'm going to move that window so that you can see what's up here. I will occasionally kind of just keep this open so I can see if there's a hand up there. But various people today will have slideshows and things like that to show as well that we'll be doing. I'm Jason Helms. I'm the director of the Center for Digital Expression, and I'm faculty in English. But I'm here because that first part, the center has gotten numerous requests this semester to talk about ChatGPT. Faculty are curious about it. Some are excited about it. Some are nervous about it. Lots and lots of different feelings. We've actually even created a forum for you to throw some of those feelings. If you have those feelings, throw them at our forum, and we can start kind of coalescing that to trying to figure out what's the temperature of faculty right now around ChatGPT and other large language models. I'll be introducing our speakers as we go. That is not our whiteboard. That's probably from a previous class. Don't worry, I'm not covering whatever that is. Thanks, Nick. And then we'll. It's become self-aware. And for those of you who can't read on Zoom, because that's probably pretty small from there, it's Clippy saying, "Hi, I'm Clippy. I am become ChatGPT destroyer of authorship." Yeah. We decided we would start dramatic. That also should let you know that while we're joking, we have some pretty legitimate concerns about large language models, both in how our students use them and what they do with the things that we produce, what they do with the things that other people produce. However, we are not concerned with them becoming Skynet and taking over the entire world. I don't personally have that concern. And I think, Jerry, you may be able to cover that better than me, that I think we're okay right now. It's my favorite. Okay, good. So I wanted to start just by showing you our ChatGPT website we have on CDEX. If you want to find it, you can find it the same way I do every time because I'm bad at navigating. I Google CDEX ChatGPT, and then I get there. And this is just a page of resources, a short video that tells you what it is, some kind of concerns that people have, and some basic concepts we're using to connect with those concerns. So the basic concepts we're centering this on is understanding that writing is thinking. My own field is composition and rhetoric. We think about writing itself as an act of thinking, as a way to understand things. When I assign writing to students, it's not because I want to receive the writing. I often don't want to receive the writing, a stack of grades. But I want them to think through the problem. I want them to be able to take it apart. Writing is an incredible analytical tool and helps you kind of get your own thoughts in front of yourself so that you can reflect on them. Writing itself is a technology that concerned people at one point. In fact, Plato has a whole screed against how it's going to ruin kids' brains. I can connect you to that later if you want to read it, but that's always fun to see. So writing is thinking, and education is not banking. It's not about, I throw you a bunch of knowledge, then you throw it back to me in the right order, therefore you pass. Sometimes we can default to that, but that's not education at its best. That's not what TCU does with education. Education is mentoring. Education is relationships. Education is so much more than that. But if we can forget that writing is thinking, we forget that education is, or we think that education is banking, then all of a sudden ChatGPT and language models like this can be really scary. When we keep these two ideas in front of us, they're a lot less scary and a lot easier to kind of handle and put in their place, whether that place be in our classroom or whether it's not in our classroom. So suggestions, 2 words that have never helped anyone: stay calm. But still good to remember, there will be other new technologies. At the end of January, beginning of February, I met with the provost about this. And one thing I said is, in 5 years, there's going to be a button in Microsoft Word that just, chat GPT it. Write this section, do something with me on this, and we'll know how to use it. It'll be part of what we do, and we'll know what it can't do and how it's useless for some things. I was only off by 5 years. Kurt sent me an email about a week later saying, well, here's the button for Google Docs. Yeah, it exists. It's a plugin in Google Docs now. So things are moving really rapidly. But remember, we have weathered technological storms before, and we will continue to do that. Admitting people. Let me handle the Zoom real quick, and I'll be back with you. I'm just going to turn off the waiting room. Now everybody can come in. It's also a chance to think about course design, return to those fundamental things. When you ask students to write, you don't want to just ask them what they already know. You want them to learn something. You want them to work through that process and think through things. Make it part of your pedagogy is another suggestion we have. Students can think ChatGPT is really tempting to use. Write my paper for me. Sometimes it'll work. And sometimes, especially if you only write that one prompt, it won't be a very good result if you never look at it again. It kind of does something pretty basic that might be wrong. Now, if you teach your students to actually use it in class, they can see its shortcomings and be less tempted to just use it in more of a plagiaristic mode. Faculty Senate is currently working through, and Jill can correct me on this, restatement of our plagiarism policies at TCU so that they address ChatGPT and what we consider that. It won't mean that faculty can't use it, but it will mean that the fundamental assumption is when we ask you to do your own work, you're not having ChatGPT do your work for you. And then it's another chance to be intentional about your assignment design. What are you asking students to do? ChatGPT is really, it's a lot like having a thesaurus and 10 minutes of Googling, right? It's maybe a little bit more advanced than that, but that's the kind of answers it gives you. And if my students can complete my assignment with that, maybe I want to rethink my assignment a little bit. I want to give them something that goes a little bit deeper. So it's a great catch for myself to say, oh, I probably could have asked them to go a little bit deeper, maybe talk more about what we're doing in class instead of leaving it quite so broad. And then we talk about some easy solutions that we don't think are going to be that successful. These are mostly rooted in how do I catch students? How do I catch them? And it sets up this adversarial relationship in teaching that we really oppose. We're adversarial against. Okay, I caught myself with that. Detection software, requiring the students to handwrite assignments, and learning to identify AI written prose yourself. So detection software is being created. It's currently, depending on the model, about 30% successful at identifying it. It also gives false positives. I would be sad if my writing came up with a false positive for an AI bot, but that's the way it goes. I don't think we want to get into that arms race. It could involve TCU paying a lot of money to some very, various ed tech people, and that money could be going to much better stuff. And I just don't think that that's the direction that we want to go. There's also asking students to handwrite assignments. But if you do that, you need to think about access, and will all your students have the same access there? We need to use the testing center for that. Is that a real accommodation, right? Is that really equal? Think through that in your own classroom. All of these things are going to change radically by what class you're teaching, what discipline you're in, all of the assignments that you want your students to do. And then we can try to learn to identify AI written prose. My best tip for that is throw your assignment into ChatGPT and see what it spits out, because it's going to give your students something pretty similar, but not the same, which is always kind of eerie and fun. All right, we have too many links after that. So go in, wander around, find some other stuff, but most importantly, there it is. Here's our Google form. Again, a place to throw your feelings. Place to say, hey, I'm scared about it. Hey, I'm excited about it. Hey, I'm scared and excited about it. What a wonderful world we live in. But we love to find out what faculty are actually thinking about it, because we base a lot of it on the 2 or 3 people who've spoken up loudly. Either this is the best thing ever, or this is the end of civilization, right? I think most faculty are somewhere in between. We want to hear from y'all too. All right, I'm going to get into our speakers now. First up, we have Jerry Weltman. And I have his bio in front of me. Jerry Weltman is a retired instructor from LSU with degrees from UT Austin, Stanford, and LSU. His field is natural language processing and teaching English as a second language. His PhD dissertation was in teaching computers to have common sense. I'll be introducing each of the speakers as they come up. Each speaker will have about 10 minutes, and then we should have about 20 minutes to a half an hour for Q&A, depending on how it goes. Thanks so much. Please welcome Jerry Weltman.
Hi, can you hear me? Okay. My name is Jerry Weltman. I don't have a prepared talk. I was asked to speak a little bit about the history of AI, a little bit about language models. I'm assuming, well, I will assume that y'all know nothing about AI, and I know a little bit more about that than you do. Probably some people in here know a lot more than I do, and I'll be very happy to take questions or corrections as I speak. People have been interested in AI since computers were invented, and natural language processing is a part of AI. Natural language processing is dealing with natural language. Anything that Google does, for example, whether understanding your queries, understanding or translating language, anything where speech recognition, This is all natural language processing. It's a very difficult problem. Back in the 1950s, people thought it was going to be a very easy problem to translate from Russian to English. I don't know why the US government was so interested back then. So they were able to input a Russian English dictionary into the computer with a little, those little punch cards. And then the goal was to you take a Russian word, you look it up, translate it to the corresponding English word. Well, the translations were terrible, as you can imagine. Why? Because every word, almost every word, has many possibilities. So a phrase like, I'll be right back, might have been translated to, I will be right to the back, or I will be right out, literally, crazy translations. How do they fix this problem? They realize you need context. When you try to do translation, you need the context of the word. How do you get the context of the word? That involves the situation. You need to teach the computer to understand the situation. This is a very difficult problem that has not yet been solved. My PhD work was in this kind of problem. How do you give computers the background knowledge, the common sense that they need to understand the situation? Computers need to understand, because they don't know, they need to understand that rain falls from the sky. It doesn't come from a wall. They need to understand that if your friend dies, you're going to be sad. They need to understand that if you're dead, you can't do other stuff. I mean, it was a problem that AI had to solve this problem. You would have programs that would have Abraham Lincoln did stuff in 1970. Well, that can't be. You need to put this rule in there to the computer. If a person's dead, they can't do, like if a person died in 1865, they can't be doing stuff in 1970. How do you put all that information into the computer? Many people have tried, and the most famous example was around 1984, when this project called Psych had the goal of putting the all of human experience into the computer. And they hired a team of linguists, philosophers, mathematicians, logicians to go through everything that we know and put them all in rules inside the computer. It was a 10-year project. After 10 years, they said, we're not quite there yet. We need a little bit more time, a few more years. They extended the project. After that, a few more years later, they said, well, we're not quite there yet. And this happened several times. Now that was 1984. I went to the Psych facility in 2010, and they were still very far from their goal. And it is considered a colossal failure. So that they were not able to put common sense into a computer. There's just too many things that we know, and we don't know how to get it in there. So then you're asking, well, how is it that we have ChatGPT? How is it that when I speak to the computer, like in Siri, most of the time, 95% of the time, I would say it understands what I say. Doesn't it need to understand context? Doesn't it need to understand the situation to be able to do that? Doesn't it need what we call intelligence? Well, this is where language models come in. About 20 years ago, people started this idea of language model. What is this? Imagine that you have every word in the English language, and you have the probability that that word can be followed by some other word. Now, how do you get that information? So if any word, let's suppose I have the word fort. What's the probability that the next word is going to be worth? Pretty high, not that high, well, pretty high. What's a probability that it's going to be the word wart? Fort, wart, very low. Okay, so if you have that information about probabilities, you can guess, if I say the word fort, what the next word is going to be. If you hear wart or worth, well, the probability of worth is much higher. So the program can choose the higher probability word. Now, how does it get all the probabilities of all the words? And it requires a lot of knowledge here, right? Well, guess what happened about 20 years ago? We got a vast amount of data about how people speak, about how people write, about how people communicate. Where did it come from? The internet. So the rise of language models coincided with the rise of the internet. We have trillions of documents, on probably trillions of documents on the internet. Computers can go through and they can, very, very time consuming and very boring. And I hate language models, they're so boring. All they do is they count how many times does this word appear next to this word. And they keep these massive indexes. You can have now the probability of this word being next to this word, or these three words being together, the bigrams and trigrams. This is what a language model is. It sounds boring, but language models turns out to be very powerful. They use this to understand language when we speak. They use this to write little essays. They use this to answer questions. Now, a few years ago, this is after my time of being in the field, large language models came about. What are large language models? Well, instead of just counting frequencies of words next to each other, they keep perhaps millions, or I'm told billions of information about each word and where it's found, the other words around it. I don't know exactly how they do it. It takes a lot of processing power. Just imagine, like, for every word it finds, it keeps track of, is it the first word in the sentence? Is it the second word? Is it the third word? Is it near certain other words? Is it near a noun? Is it near an adverb? Is this stuff that we think of as intelligence? No, we don't think this is intelligent at all. This is just silly, keeping track of numbers, statistics, probabilities. But using these large language models, they've been able to reproduce incredibly realistic writing. Is it creating anything new? No way. All it's doing is taking what it finds, and the internet is where it finds it, and using probabilities, rolling the dice, and guessing what word is going to happen next. Not just that, though. They use humans. Humans are part of the mix. And I'm told that ChatGPT hired people from, I think, Kenya, Africa, at $2 an hour to read the output of ChatGPT and sort of grade it. How realistic was this on a scale of, say, 1 to 5? And they spent a lot of money, and they got a lot of what they call training data to fine tune the model. So when the first step is to train the model on information from a huge amount of data like the internet, and then you fine tune it with humans. And based on that, the computer program learns which answers are more likely to be on the right path and which answers are less likely. It doesn't know what it's doing. All it's doing is following the probabilities. One thing that you should understand from this is that training data is incredibly important. Computers don't have intelligence. All they have is what you give it. If you give it a lot of training data about normal people speaking, normal people are very racist, sexist, etc. What's going to come out is the same thing. If you don't want that to happen, how can you fix it? You have to change the training data. That means you need people to go into these, let's say, billions of documents and decide which ones are what we want the computer to emulate and which ones we don't want it to emulate. Well, that's a really hard problem. Or you have to have people like the hired people in Kenya, Africa, to go through and maybe tag certain things as racist or sexist and let the computer learn that way. Either way, it's a difficult problem. And it's going to be an ongoing problem as long as we have these large language models that learn from natural language. So that concludes my talk. Thank you.
Thank you. That was wonderful. 2 quick additions. You can check me on these. You're the expert. But I read the Time magazine article about the Kenyan workers as well. One thing I wanted to say is they're not just looking for the racism. They were actually tasked with typing it in. It was a test. In other words, they had to write the worst things they could think of and try to make sure that the computer wouldn't engage with them. And they talked about this story. It sounded like a science fiction horror movie, not just like a Black Mirror thing, but like something out of Alien, where they were just literally talking with a monstrous sociopathic machine, talking about the grossest stuff they could. And the workers talked about having nightmares about it. When we talk about ethics around this, we're not just thinking about plagiarism. We're thinking about the people who have to train this, and we're thinking about the large effects that it's going to have as well. Thanks so much for bringing that up. And then the other was, this is just a little thing that I like. Hubert Dreyfus and What Computers Can't Do. He's writing in the 70s. I believe he was not involved in the psych model. In fact, very vocally not involved in the psych model. But you mentioned that problem. It's something that we have not yet solved. And I think you might be of this mindset that we may never solve this problem. Hubert Dreyfus's book, What Computers Can't Do, is that AI will never exist. It will never look like human intelligence, because to have human intelligence, he's a Heideggerian. He's like, they can't be aware of their own death. If you're not aware of your own death, you're not human. That's the essence of what it means to be human. I think that's a really interesting approach. I find it, exciting. But it's also a call to remember, what is it that we do so well? I always like that part too. Thank you very much. Our next speaker is John Kyung Kim. He's a doctoral candidate in English at TCU, where he teaches courses on writing as inquiry and argument, digital humanities, British Gothic literature, and university life. His working dissertation, entitled Gothic Ontography, Changing Materialism in British Ghost Story, examines material manifestations of the ghosts in the works of Horace Walpole, P.B. Shelley, Charlotte Riddell, Algernon Blackwood, and William Hope Hodgson. He published articles on British Romantic sonnets, Victorian urban Gothic, and modern ghost stories. His research interests include British writers, spectral imagination, literary statistical outliers, digital humanities pedagogy, and global citizenship education in the English composition and literature classroom. Please welcome John Kyung.
So much for inviting me to this wonderful panel, and then the table that I've been longing for to be part of. And then thanks so much for making the kind introduction to me. So let's say the word that I spit out when I was about to create this project for my students a year ago. So obviously designing is not my strong suit at all. So I enjoy doodling and then scrambling, but designing has never been my priority in my life. But I came to the States and the TCU in 2016, and that when South Korea was bombarded by the Google DeepMind. So the master of Go, which is an Oriental chess, the Korean Go master was harshly beaten by AI machine. So and then Koreans were never expected seeing our world champion Go master globally shamed. But there was a moment of beauty. He actually won one game. And then the documentary which recorded all the journey of his competition with the AI, instructed us how can we approach AI technology very quintessential human's perspective. How can you redefine art or education, even the human? So that's where my project started. So last year, in the fall semester, I taught introduction to women's writing course, and then I created 2 final projects, and then one of them was asking students to create a book cover. So we read 8 books, including nonfiction or fiction, and then the goal of the project tied with my teaching philosophy. So as a PhD student and as a would-be teacher, I always aim to help students to cross boundaries between a reader and the writer, and the recorder and the coder, and the consumer to producer. So AI technology or any kinds of digital technology allows us to cross these boundaries freely and then radically. But the point that I wanted to highlight with the project that I created was through critical and then creative engagement, because we are educator, at the same time we're a researcher, but we need, at least from my point of view, I think we pursue this intersection between critical mind and then creative engagement. That's fine, sir. Okay, so this is the prompt for the product, but I am not going to read everything. I want to just focus on the lines in black. The book covers represent not only the entirety of its story, but also display a designer's keen critical and creative literacy of the book. In the process of designing, students need to think through how they engage with the chosen text, what genre characteristics of the book, they like to foreground through their designing process, and how they make a front and then book covers persuade a customer to purchase the book. So this is the overarching theme and the object of the project. So during the pandemic, I was one of the persons who started getting into TikTok. So I was just scrolling all night. And then I use social media for a very particular purpose. So for example, I'm using TikTok in order to be educated about AI technology only. I do not use TikTok for other reasons. So I ran into these two people. The Karen Chang, she identified herself as a digital creator. And then she posted one video, and then within 1 minute, she explained that she showed how AI generative technology has been chosen by the editor of Cosmopolitan magazine. So for the first time during the pandemic, they were meeting on Zoom, and then they ran the AI, the Dall-E, and then they obtained the cover image, and then they put the image to the physical book, and then they let it out. Yes. So that thing happened 2 years ago. And then that enlightened me. Okay, the industry moves way faster than I think. And then the other lady, she identified herself as a Miss Nat Mac. She's a book designer, and then during the pandemic, she started her YouTube channel and then the TikTok channel. She was so helpful for this project because she posted 6 videos within a minute. She walked through the process of the book design. So I used her video tutorial as a guidance for my students. So even though I'm not a book design expert, I was able to guide my students to this project. So this is Dall-E. So I tried to get access, but it looks like the page is down for now. Yeah, so if you try to get access to this page, you will see what it is. Dog and then 4G are fixing the website. But the reason I put this image there, Dall-E is an AI system that creates realistic image and art from a description in natural language. So I do want to highlight realistic and the description. So those are the two ideas that I wanted to highlight through this project. And then as an instructor, obviously I had to come up with the evaluation rubric for students' outcome. So in addition to creating the book cover image, I asked the student to write about what kind of rhetorical choices, consideration they made, and then why they choose the AI generated tool over other hand-on the tools like Photoshop or the Canva. So students had to think about what's the difference, what's the pros and cons, including the ethical element concerns as well. So I'll quickly go over a couple of students' work. So she got this front cover and back cover. She didn't draw anything. But what she did is that as you see on this side, she created the prompt. So creating prompt was the key for this project. I asked the student to, by utilizing your critical engagement and then creative engagement with the text based on class discussion, and then based on other final product, which asked the student to compare two texts they read, students were able to create one very short prompt. And then once the student put this prompt on the website, she got these 2 images. Obviously, with the raw images, she did extra work. By extra work, what I mean by that, she made a change to the font style, and she adjusted the placement of the letters. So this is end project. This is another one. She tried to not add too much additional touch to the image that the Dall-E created. So there's no way for the student to draw this graphic image by herself because she has never illustrated anything. So this is another, it looks like more realistic. The reason I emphasize the realistic is that one of the students was so into the idea of realism when we discussed and read the Mexican Gothic genre. So she intentionally put realistic image in her prompt. So this is the result. And then another student also choose realistic. But it's interesting to see how AI responds and then interpret the term realistic. And then the student to choose intentionally, purposefully, the more like a comic style. So the student to put comic style. And then what does this imply? Imply that the Dall-E or AI generated tools respond to our specific term for genre. So this is much more advanced. And then another student created this image, and then in her reflection, she mentioned that Gabriella is not Korean American or Asian. She has no connection with Asian descent, but every time she tried to get Asian woman's image, Dall-E failed her, betrayed her expectations. So it tells us to the class when she was going over the process, the students, and then myself, we were able to discuss how this AI data set perceives the stereotype of an Asian woman. So my argument is maybe this is a time as an educator, my expertise is literary studies. So maybe we can argue literary critic as a prompt engineer, or vice versa, prompt engineer as a literary critic. So if we go further with more intense and proposable project, we might be able to make a transition between these two terms. So this is the definition of prompt engineering. It sounds very boring and then long. So one image might be more useful for us. So basically, when you go access any AI generated tools in the internet, the first thing you need to do is obviously you need to create your account first and then typing prompt. So basically, imagine there's a genie in the magic lamp, and then you're asking genie what you wanted him or they do. The thing is that how can we, as an instructor and then as a student, how can we come up with a more incisive and then more proposable prompt? So creating prompt has been translated in this area as a prompt engineering. If you type prompt engineering on Google, you will see prompt engineering has been immersed as one of the high-end jobs for now. So what do they imply? Whether English department or even sociology, we probably need to train our students to educate them to adjust to this needs or needs. So the topics I wanted to throw to the audience today include four. Prompt. Can we think about consider prompt engineering as a theory and then practice? So how can you figure out the intersection? How can you play at the intersection and the interaction among literary studies, rhetoric and composition, and then creative writing and the digital humanities? And also, how can we imagine diversity of classes, courses we can apply wide range of AI generated tools? So for example, in my class this semester, the thing I'm teaching this semester, I will introduce the AI generated tools, including video generation and then voice generation, even song generation. So my students will use these AI generated tools in order to create a public campaign on sitting on table. The last question I wanted to pose is that this should be a collective work. It shouldn't be one person individual work. So we need to archive the journey of trial and then errors, and then share it. So that way we can be more informed, and then we can be more efficiently create or generate a wide range of the prompt. Thank you so much for
All right, and I was actually talking to a colleague yesterday, and I apologize to the graduate students here to let you know that sometimes we faculty do get frustrated with our institution. I'm just open about that every once in a while. And he said something along the lines like, "What am I doing here? And I could go make $300K a year as a prompt engineer." I just went, so I think we all know what we'll be Googling after this. And if you've taken nothing else, thank you very much, Jung Kyung. Our next speaker is Nick Bontrager. Nick is an interdisciplinary artist whose work and research explores the physical and conceptual nature of the moving image, game-based interactions and exchanges, and the idea of replicas or facsimiles as tools of preservation or understanding. He's currently an associate professor of new media art here at TCU. Sorry, that has an exclamation.
You can explain.
He's currently an associate professor of new media art here at TCU. He recently completed the video game Myst after nearly 30 years of failed attempts, and he draws a darn good Clippy, if I do say so myself.
Thanks. Pull up my slides here. So I'm gonna start with forget I'm on a Mac. I was looking for the wrong button. 10 minutes is not long to discuss how some of these tool sets and language models will really impact or have already impacted the arts. So I'm going to instead focusing on a couple of small examples, but I do want to encourage you to seek me out, have a conversation, and ask me what you're thinking about or something I may have not included in this slide. Quickly, I ran into, 50, 60 slides and then realized, oh, this is 10 minutes. I'm going to delete most of these. So instead, I'm just going to kind of talk about a few of the things that we have touched on in my classes, but also have touched on in my studio practice, and a lot of things that may be exciting, but also disappointing, like with any tool that an artist will begin to kind of start to incorporate into their practice. Just like finding a new hammer. How is this different from my old hammer? What can it hit that is different from this other hammer? So we're kind of approaching that in the same way. This on the screen right now is kind of some of the early examples, maybe from about 7 or 8 years ago, where I was kind of playing with similar tool sets and language models and image generation, and it was pretty slow. So I would sit there and as I was tired of using my graphics card to get Bitcoins and other kinds of coins, I would say, well, I could use this to make images and text things. That could be fun, but this might take maybe 8 hours or so to generate these little short animations. And that was kind of, interesting departures from some of the things I was doing at the time. It's a lot faster now. And as we saw already, Dall-E and other image generation platforms can give you that quick result that can sometimes be more gratifying, but also maybe not force you to consider the prompt, where when I was considering, this is going to take it should be good, I would sit there and really, debate on, well, should I include this word? Should I think about this? What will happen if I use this phrase? And it forced me to kind of move a little slowly, and maybe that impacted how I use the tools now. ChatGPT has been, an interesting exploration of using in classroom studies or with students or with colleagues related to coding practices, because while I can point someone at the documentation for maybe a new program or a new software and say, you can read hundreds of pages and all the information is there that you need to begin playing around with this or exploring your ideas, that might be daunting or something that they don't want to deal with. And so instead they could ask ChatGPT or other language models, hey, what can you put together an example of this? And then we can then take that and kind of adjust it or tweak it or add it to other things. So it's just kind of been an interesting streamlined documentation search or Google search for some of my classes, where on the left is the example of using something called processing, where very quickly we're just getting an example that now we could then go in and start to understand how that code base is working, or what those kind of language directions are and how we can change them and modify them. So it's helped us kind of jump more quickly into some of the practices that my students are interested in. The biggest disappointment so far and challenges are, if I want to do something that's not a very, clear, object-oriented structure, and maybe I want to do something that's a little more malleable, something that might be called a node-based language. Something right here is called Max MSP Jitter, and it's been used for many years by musicians, artists, researchers, but it is node-based, which means on the right, you basically have a graphic representation of your code. So you add little objects, you connect them together, they work together, and you use it kind of like an old patch system that you might see on like a telephone, right? Where it's like, I'm going to connect this thing to this thing, and this thing to this thing, this thing to this thing. But because there's that lack of an oriented linear structure, when ChatGPT tries to tell me how to make a Max MSP patch or object, it just throws constant errors. It's incorrect. It's using, the wrong versions, or that object doesn't exist yet because the code base is older and the language model is outdated already by the time the software's been updated. And so it's been interesting to kind of get excited about some of those aspects of how this can enhance or streamline teaching opportunities or examples for my classes, but also it's very easy to find those pitfalls or the holes in the current, kind of deployed usage of the structure. One of the biggest limits that I've run into, of course, as many of you may have already, if you've been exploring these, are that there may be language or information that is provided to you, and the language model, of course, is protected. It doesn't want to tell you where that information came from. And so I have often seen an artwork that I've loved and then immediately forgotten the name of the artist, or I forgot where I saw it. And I know it was 10 years ago. I know what city I was in, but I can't remember what gallery it was or something. So in asking ChatGPT, I got very excited when it said it knew the exact name of the artist, and it gave me a name of the artist. It told me the name of the artwork because I was excited. I wanted to see the artwork again. But then, of course, it wouldn't tell me where I could find that artwork. And when I told it that I couldn't find anything online, there was not a web presence, or that artist's name didn't exist online, at least as far as I could find, can you help me more? And you would get this kind of canned response of, I can't share my language model with you. I'm sorry. I can't find anything. I apologize. Try to go to your local library and talk to an artist. And those are their suggestions.
Nick, what's the name of the company that runs this again?
Open AI. I know, so confusing. And so I just, it's this, I felt like the rug was pulled out from under me in that moment where you get so excited. Somebody knows what I'm talking about. Somebody is also excited about this thing. And then, oh no, I can't tell you that. That's something I just can't let go, but here, take all this other information. So it's been kind of a roller coaster of emotions. Is sometimes good, but also sometimes very frustrating. Looking at some of the image generation tools, my students and I and friends that have kind of begun playing with these tools and have continued for many years, think of it as this kind of surrealistic game that many of you are probably familiar with, called Exquisite Corpse, where you're, kind of trading off prompts or working together with other artists or people to draw parts of a drawing, and then you hand it to somebody and they draw parts of it and they draw parts of it. So we've kind of compared it to this kind of example of trading off and contributing to a shared image. I think it's kind of like reverse Pictionary in my classes, where we just throw a word that this prompt, and we see like, what would it do if we did this? What would it do if this did? I would have done it this way, as we're sitting there in a room full of artists and creative minds, where we've already discussed already on this panel that we're not necessarily creating or conceiving new information or images. It's rather just regurgitating or combining what might already exist. And that's not a bad thing in the arts, but it is interesting to see how it makes, decisions based upon probability and based upon existing image sets. So some of the very first things, I would throw at it were these very strange things that I wouldn't necessarily be interested in drawing in my studio in that moment, but it was interesting to see in a few seconds what somebody else might consider based on this prompt. If I was asking them, examples, or if I was thinking about new sculptures or things that I might want to make in a gallery setting, what would this look like? And it's essentially just like if you've ever been sitting on an airplane and you get this like tiny little glance through the seat at the person in front of you and like, what are they reading? Like, maybe that's something I should look at. Or what movie is that? Can I figure it out from watching it on mute and they're not using subtitles? Maybe it's this thing. I'm interested in that. And, this is pretty much what it's like when we do it together with my classes is, like, that's so weird. Like, I wouldn't have done that, or I would have used this color, or what media does it think that is? Because that doesn't look like pen and ink, or, that was in my prompt. Why doesn't it know that? And we quickly find these shortcomings, but also it can become a very quick way to rapidly prototype ideas and compositions and then critically address them as a group. So it's kind of strengthens my class conversation a little bit, because maybe in that first time, we're able to really give, have a critical conversation about the non-human And they're more likely to be critical. They're more likely to say, I don't like that, or that is something that I have a problem with and I would have done differently, as opposed to their peer in the room that says, I think you did a great job. Cool. So it's began having some really great conversations about it. Also, when we start giving it prompts related to art history and asking it to reference specific artists or movements, and clearly seeing where, again, like, that's not what that would look like if Giotto painted that. And, you know, like, why does it think that that is the correct outcome? What's the language model, you know, using for those references? Maybe my magnum opus and Dall-E is seeing how short of a prompt I can provide that will generate the most laughs. And every time I look at this image, I laugh, because not only is it something that goes against the entire brand of McDonald's, but it says McDonald's. The way that image generation engines handle faces and text is so unusual, and things are misspelled, but it's kind of like, there's those great examples. I'm sure one of the many English professors and purveyors of language in the room can correct me, but it's when you leave letters out of words and they're misspelled, but your brain puts them all together, right? Like, we read them very quickly, fast enough that our brain solves the problem. And McDonald's is one of those examples. Oh, okay, I guess I put the pieces together. I really enjoy making images of people looking at art in Dall-E and other image generation images, just to see how emotion is conveyed, because I think that's something that we are not necessarily thinking about is within that layer of image generation images. We are often creating the outcome, we're creating the artwork, but I'm also interested in taking it one layer further. And, you know, what does it look like if you're also generating somebody reacting to the artwork that you're generating? And so when you put together things like museum people looking at an artwork, it becomes this like extra strange Cronenbergian world where faces don't exist or people have melted, and it's combining different facial features or trying to understand emotion and facial tics. And then one of the more interesting things that you can do in some in generation engines is called outpainting. And this is something that I think was really surprising to people that were using the Dall-E platform, because you can give it a small image. You can see on the right there, it was from the James Webb Telescope, one of the first new images that were released. And then you ask it to essentially guess what would that image look like in a bigger space, but you can also add in like cats surfing on rainbows and things like that. But it's pretty similar to what many of our students use in Photoshop, where they use the content aware tool, where if you need to move something or delete something, guess the pixel color, like maybe it would try to fill in a gap instead of just leaving a void. And so many of our students have been using that for years, and our professors are using that to generate their artwork. And we don't necessarily think of that as a generative tool, but it is. It's just part of an existing set that we have agreed as image makers is part of our toolbox and serves a purpose. We don't give it much more than that in terms of importance, and it can solve a problem, but it doesn't often solve it extremely well. So the last thing here is thinking about, like, these are the difficulties that we'll face in addition to many more that we'll discuss today. But, you know, I often will use web-based platforms to share artworks with my student, or 3D scans we make in class. And one of the more new settings that have popped up in those worlds are how to make sure that your images or your 3D objects or whatever you're making is not going to be rolled or asked not to be rolled into a new learning model. And so this is something that, as a, you know, an artist or a visual maker, you can kind of start thinking about how to protect your own artwork from that world and from future language models. So that's it.
Thanks so much, Nick. That last part reminded me of Adobe has a new AI or a generative art model. I don't know if you've seen that. It's I believe not released yet, but it's in beta. What is it? Firefly. And one of the things that really cracked me up about it is it brands itself as ethical AI. The reason it's ethical is because it will not pull from copyrighted images. In other words, it will steal from images that people made and not give them attribution unless they've copyrighted and are trying to charge money for it. So as long as we're not actually stealing, as long as we're not, violating capitalism, it's not a violation. And I thought, what an interesting understanding of ethics. What a creative understanding of ethics. Next up, we have Dr. Joanna Schmidt. And I keep forgetting to say it. We are recording the Zoom session. That's probably not that important to the audience here right now. Nobody's really interacting yet, but especially when we get into the QA, I want you to know that we will be recording you as we go and putting this up in the future. And because I'm not a machine, I have forgotten that 4 times, and I finally got it out. Dr. Joanna Schmidt is the director of the Kaler Center for Instruction, Innovation, and Engagement, and has been at TCU since 2011. She's actually here when I got hired, and I've been here a while now, I think. She provides pedagogical development opportunities and instructional design for faculty, teaching staff, GAs, TAs, and departments. Dr. Schmidt was previously the assistant director of the illustrious Center for Digital Expression. Thank you. Where she supported teachers in developing multimodal and non-traditional assignments, as well as teaching students to use alternative composing tools. One more round of applause for this. Oh, for you, sorry.
Thanks, everybody. Okay, I'm gonna pull mine up. So mine's gonna be a little differently because I'm trying to maybe synthesize some of the things that I'm seeing across the teaching and learning conversations that are happening at other teaching and learning centers, as well as in the news media, and then also what I'm hearing from faculty coming in and asking me questions around all of this. So there's kind of these major types of AI in teaching and learning, and they end up in kind of these major 3 buckets. The first one is that generative, that's the ChatGPT, the Dall-E ones that we're talking about. And then the next one, which I will briefly touch on, are these detection softwares that are then trying to detect the AI that is being generated. And then I think the last one that I see, but a little less press, is the idea of like this invisible AI. So these are things like your spell checker, the autocomplete on your phone, Grammarly. If anybody's been using that in the recent years, that is also an AI tool. So when we think that like AI is new, it's not. It's been around. It may just have been invisible to us, and our students have already been using it. We've been using it maybe for a while. You're going to get the slides afterwards from Kurt, so don't worry about that. One brief thing I wanted to point out is that there is an update coming to Turnitin. It is being pushed out to every Turnitin with Feedback Studio. So TCU has Feedback Studio. If you already use Turnitin in the assignment tool, you'll be able to go in starting Tuesday. They're launching this out. There is no way for us to turn this off. Dr. Huckabee and Travis and I have already been in contact with Turnitin and having conversations about this. There's going to be this little thing that's called like an AI indicator. They're claiming that through ChatGPT 3 and 3.5, they're getting a 98% certainty match. And if they have less than that, then they're not going to flag it as AI. We have not been able to test this. We don't know anything more than that at this point. There's still a lot of information to come out. You are welcome to use it, but do know that it is a free pilot only until December 31st, 2023. So, and there's, as far as I know, we don't know anything further than that. So if this is something that you are of interest, it is coming out. It is going to be deployed into our platform. If you don't want to use it, you don't have to. Okay. So most of what I hear from faculty at TCU is thinking about generative writing regarding AI writing. And as I've been listening to everybody and reading and looking at what's coming, I found that there's kind of these levels of how we're interacting with the AI, and they're categorized by who is using it, what the input is, and then what's the goal. So I think we all kind of started this like level 1. The instructors are the ones who are using this. We're putting in our existing teaching materials and ideas for assignments and tests, and we're trying to understand what the capabilities are. And if that's where you're at, that's totally fine. I'm going to talk through some additional levels that I'm seeing other people using. So if you do want to try and explore other paths, I'm hoping this can give you some ideas, as well as some of the ones that you've already heard from some colleagues up here. Level 2 is this idea that the instructors are still the ones putting in the prompts. They're putting in general topics or questions related to course content. An example might be like, provide me a short summary of X. And these are places where they're generating samples or content for students that maybe are going to like go in the LMS. You know, so like I need like a little introductory paragraph about X topic. bam, and they'll put it in there. Or maybe there's some sort of overview. It still requires you as the expert to know that that's correct information and that it's useful for the context. The next level is this idea where instructors are using it and they're putting in prompts or questions that are going to produce examples or artifacts. Maybe they're having it create position statements or answers, things that we might have asked students in the past, can I use your work in the future? They're using the AI to generate some of these pieces that then they can use with students to interact with. Right? So versus just consumption, the students are now critiquing it. What are the pros and cons, whether they know it's AI generated or not? Like, what are the shortcomings of this? Or how would I tweak it in this way? Level 4 is where the students maybe are starting to be the ones who are using it. And this is where maybe they're putting in prompts or questions around these course topics or themes, and they're trying to have it synthesize some of that large language modeling to produce something. And this is maybe where they're using it to help generate ideas or brainstorming, but what the text at the end is not the end product that they're going to use, right? So like it creates something, and from that, I create what my actual end product is. I'm not turning that in ideally as my own work. Level 5 is where the students are then actually putting in the input. It's open-ended and recursive. They have tweaks to styles and clarifications. I think you all kind of generate in this level. Maybe they're having them write a description of X in Y style. Now, what happens if I change the style to something else? What if I keep refining it over time? This is where students are now like co-creating texts or elements that may be part of the end product that they're actually going to turn in. So these are things I'm seeing where people are creating websites as final products, and they're using the different types of tools to create some of the content to populate that, right? And then there's a 6th level that I'm just calling the unknown. And this is where students are putting in, I don't know. And I think that there are some places where we can think about this for teaching and learning needs. This is where we're maybe helping them learn to use AI to review material, to give them explanations if they're still struggling with something, to help them produce content for assignments that we have asked them to use it for. I'm hearing that students are using it for self-tutoring. They're using it when they get run into a creative roadblock and they're just kind of stuck, to help it brainstorm some ideas, and they did take one and kind of move forward with it. So moving forward, I found this article, and this is going to be linked in the handout that I'm giving to you all, to Kurt to send out. This is just from March 16th of this year. And I think that this is probably one of the best ones I found, because it's giving you some strategies, including the prompts for how to use this in your teaching and learning. So this is hitting these like level 2, level 3s that we were just talking about. So if you're at like level 1 and you want to take one step, this is going to give you some strategies. If you're already doing 4s and 5s, you need some ideas for like what to do in class or how to maybe use it even more to help with your side. This is going to help with that as well. So for each of the 5 strategies, I'm going to give you number 1 as an example. The first strategy is using AI to produce many varied examples. And the thing that I think that this paper really helped me see is I was not writing very good prompts when I was playing around with it. So it's totally worth reading through the entire thing to see how they're writing the prompts in order to get something different. So for example, in this case, this is the prompt that they used. I would like you to act as an example generator for students. When confronted with new and complex concepts, adding many and varied examples helps students better understand those concepts. I would like you to ask what concept I would like examples of and what level of students I'm teaching. You will look up the concept and then provide me with 4 different and varied accurate examples of the concept in action. I was not writing prompts like this. So they put it into ChatGPT 4 in Bing, and then also the ChatGPT 3.5, and then they were using 4 because it just had come out like the week before. So this is what Bing produced. And so I won't read it off all to you here, but basically they put in the prompt and then it says, sure, like I can help you with that. Opportunity cost is, here's the definition. And then here's a sample that you can use in your class. And then they said, well, could you give me some example using popular movies? And it's like, sure, here's some examples. And so it gives the example of Matrix, the Matrix and the red pill versus the blue pill. So you can see like in a class when you're trying to come up with just examples to use or to reference, this is kind of that idea here. In ChatGPT, they gave a similar prompt, but then asked it to ask me what level. And in this case, they said college students. And so they're talking about opportunity cost. And the example it gave tailored to college students is the idea of choosing a major. And the other ones it gives are things like studying versus socializing, or part-time job versus internship. Right? So the 5 strategies that this paper covers are using AI to produce these many varied examples, to provide multiple explanations, to develop low stakes tests with answer keys, assess student learning, and to distribute practice of important ideas. And that's the idea of coming back and like revisiting topics that you had covered earlier and helping them find connections and bridging and having it do some of the question writing for that. Now, one important consideration, especially for number 4, this idea where it's saying it's talking about assess student learning. It is not talking about like having it do the grading for you. They're using it in a very specific manner they're saying, let's say you've done a minute paper at the end of the class period, and I want you to write the thing that confused you the most and the thing that you still have questions on. Just take all of those and then put it into it and have it synthesize what were the main points. So rather than having to read through 40 or 50 of these, it'll try and tell you what were the ones that people are still struggling with. But as we've been talking about, should you be putting student writing into AI without their knowledge? And what should you disclose about how you're using AI and perhaps regarding their student generated content? So I think these are still a lot of questions that we all still kind of have to think about, but I didn't want you to see assess student learning and think that it's like gonna grade for you, right? Finally, I just have some additional resources. The article that I'm talking about is from the Social Science Research Network. They also have an entire AI and ChatGPT topic hub of research that's already there, which is really fascinating. I've put a crowdsourcing doc of people who are writing classroom policies for AI generative tools. So if you've been thinking about that and you want to read what other professors have been doing from all across the United States, and other teaching and learning centers have been kind of collecting these. You can do that. And then we've been talking a lot about our own experiences. So I wanted to include something about the students, and the Chronicle just had a great article this week about what do students think of ChatGPT. So I've linked that to you for you here. That's it.
Thanks. In a moment, we'll have time for Q&A, so be thinking of your questions now. I wanted to cover 2 last things briefly. The first is that Dr. Beata Jones from business was originally part of this. We scheduled for times that she couldn't make, but she has been so instrumental in thinking about ChatGPT and using it in her classes, in helping us generate that resource page. So many of those resources come directly from her that I did not want that to go left unsaid. Additionally, she's been using it to teach her students coding and to have the students code along with ChatGPT. Dr. Odie, have you been trying that as well a little bit? And I did it with my students a bit. It's an exceptional coding tutor. As the issues that Nick pointed out, it's not always right. But because of that, it can actually help the students learn to sort out what it might have done wrong as well, in ways that actually giving them good resources don't always teach them, because they're just like, okay, type it in, now it works, now run it. But it teaches things very conceptually. It's actually been very helpful. I've encouraged my students to use it. The most helpful thing for me about ChatGPT is it's just like talking to your roommate about an assignment you're working on. They can bounce some ideas off. They may not know much about the topic or certainly about the course itself, but they can help you get on the right track and start to get those ideas out. ChatGPT is a great help in coming up with research questions for just that reason. They're not going to say the most interesting thing. It's not going to say the most interesting thing, but it might get you started. It might help you get writing and get you out of some writer's block. And I think I'm going to check the chat. We've got 7 in the chat and 2 in the Q&A. What do I prioritize, Q&A or chat?
Chat.
Chat. Okay, good. Thank you. Can't see what's on the monitor. Very bright blank. I am so sorry. Yep. I have lots of regrets now. Can you show the screen? Sharing the screen would be great if possible. You're able to make the screen. These are wonderful questions. We will share all of the slides afterwards. I apologize sincerely, Zoom. I really wish I had seen that earlier and looked at it. What kind of assignments are more ChatGPT friendly? All right, table. Any thoughts on what kind of assignments are more ChatGPT friendly?
Some things that are synthesizing information, or that's trying to that can pull things together, that is actually able to rely on the prediction element of it.
I think it depends on what we mean by friendly, right?
Yeah.
Do we want the ChatGPT to get it right, or do we want the students to use ChatGPT and then get it right themselves? The synthesis, I think ChatGPT is going to have a decent shot at doing well at that. Other thoughts?
That's great.
All right, what questions does the audience have? Jill.
Joanna, I had a question for you. One of the second to last line, I think it was about, should we, the ethics of inputting our student writing? What happens when a student puts our writing in there? 'Cause that's what I'm thinking is what I was testing when I was playing the ChatGPT. I was taking essay exams.
Yeah.
Responses were terrible because I would be really long that were really complex. But that prompt is copyright in a sense. That's my creative generative text that I have written. So, what's happening then if they're sitting there cutting and pasting my prompt into the ChatGPT to generate a question? If we're worried about the ethics of putting our students stuff, what about the because I don't know that my students are doing it to my version.
Well, just to repeat the question, Jill Havens, faculty senate chair, asked, what happens when our students are putting in our work, our assignment prompts and things like that into ChatGPT? Right, Joanne, I believe that was for you.
I think these two are kind of pointing to interesting things. I don't know enough about it to know if it's storing the things that you're putting in it, but I don't know. I mean, we don't know that. I think when you were asking, like, where's the source material coming from? I don't know that we have a good sense of what it's
because we
It's
actually
learning
have,
from
we
it.
have written policy
Yeah.
post-COVID that protects any work product that faculty produce in terms of assignments, tests, any of that stuff, PowerPoints, all of that is protected now, and it cannot be, you can't have students posting it on their Facebook page. These Facebook page, but
or
they're
putting it
not-
into repositories.
yeah, they're not, there is now a policy in the university that they can't do that. So I'm curious as to whether this would be kind of dealing with that.
We got another question over here. Yeah.
Well, this is the question just to add on to what they're saying is, I'm not sure if it necessarily like stores the information and sends it to GPT, but it does store it. Because as you type it, it will like be there for like the next few months and you can go back to previous conversations you've had with it. So it is storing all of the prompts.
But that's only in your usage of it, so it's not necessarily going out.
But it
to
is
other
on
people.
limits, they have access to it in their data.
Yes.
Whether or not.
It will be used to train.
Yeah.
That's what I, so
It will be used to train all
does
the
that
things.
issue, does that become?
ChatGPT is learning every time anybody.
Everyone
puts in.
sees, yeah, so whether that then becomes, I'm not gonna remember the precise term, but, like artwork being protected, original artwork. And does my prompt or whatever I've given my student, PowerPoints I create, things like that, becomes my intellectual work.
But I think that's maybe where the policy that you're
Yeah.
working on is going to help maybe clarify some of that this does include this piece of it, because we already have this existing policy. Right.
That's it.
But I think because it's a black box, things like, I don't know how it's storing it.
We don't know enough about it.
It's an interesting challenge because it gets more into the realm of appropriation. And right now, if you hit those limits in ChatGPT that I was pointing out, it's very clear that the language model or the data set that it's using is outdated by a couple of years. And so there's kind of this essentially edited language set, similar to some of the like, let's remove all the racist, like really bad stuff, and then we'll use this as a functioning model. Of course, it's surely likely that it's going to take all the new interactions and the fact that only a month ago or 2 months ago, ChatGPT was dealing with server crashes and billions of users getting added essentially overnight, and it's the amount of information that's coming into that platform is so massive that it's going to be just a monumental challenge to then edit that. So I think you would get less into direct copyright of per sentence reuse of IPs, but more in the same kind of appropriated elements that by talking to your students, you're making an impact on them that likely they may say a phrase that you said in their future careers in the same way where it's kind of planting these little bits of your creative kind of research or teaching that will likely appear in future language models.
We've got a question in the back I'll go to in just a moment. First, I want to read the chat. Someone has asked a quick question there. Carol House says, I put an assignment prompt into ChatGPT in a nursing writing emphasis course, and then together with students, we critiqued it. They were very insightful. It's just copy and paste ChatGPT answers. Cheating, but really could help teach how to write concisely. I did this on a whim, but do you recommend doing this? So what do you think? Have ChatGPT answer one of your assignments and then have students critique it? Is there value to that? I would think so.
I did the practices. So for example, I'm teaching two technical machine technology, which is argumentative writing course. So I asked the student to submit first draft, and then the day before I played with ChatGPT overnight using the same prompt that I gave the students. The goal was I wanted to get ChatGPT's response to my sophisticated prompt. I intentionally sophisticated the prompt with the raw ideas, and then the day after my playing with the ChatGPT, I gave the evaluation rubric to my students, and then I didn't tell them this was generated by AI, and then unanimously students gave a B+, even though I told them it's a first draft. Then the reason was first, I wanted to make sure that students understand the evaluation, because that's the most important thing for students to start writing. And the second thing was I wanted to give not necessarily warn or alert or scare them. I wanted to tell them you're using Grammarly on your phone, and everyone is using it. And Microsoft launched the Copilot. The more we are not typing, but then what that means that this AI technology predicts what we is supposed to think in a particular certain rhetorical situation. So how can you take a detour intentionally? So I think from my point of view, the most important thing at this point is as an educator and researcher, how can you secure or protect or redefine difference? Because all AI technology is all about categorization and classification. So how can you navigate the niche through with our project? And the students were very excited, but at the same time they were motivated because now they are competing with the AI paper. They are competing. So it was a really good inspiration and to be the combined record.
And it's interesting to what extent students have already been influenced by it to think of that style as something that they should aim for, something that should be imitated.
I'm not teaching writing students this semester, but when I was playing around with it to get a sense of what it's doing and how it's functioning, one of the quickest kind of things I was catching on was saying if I take a very simple prompt, let's say I take the prompt for write me a roundtable description for ChatGPT with teaching a learning conference thing, right? If I put that in there and then ask it to do it in different styles, I was trying to critique and analyze what does it think a style like X means? What if I change this one word asking for the style, how does it change the way that this talks? So it would provide me with some quick samples to be able to talk about how style influences tone and language choice, and where it didn't change the language, and where it kind of falls short of the expectations of what those look like. And I think to the larger question about a student's right to their own language and the way in which language processing affects that, I think is another kind of avenue to explore with them.
Absolutely.
And
Yeah, please.
in terms of formats, it's fascinating to ask ChatGPT to write a grant book, because it is forced to put together budgets and line items. And when I would throw in something like make a grant proposal about a new painting that will be in a public space, and then it's throwing in $50,000 for paint and $10 for canvas. Where is the value in this? How it assesses the value, or what it thinks the value is, because that's not something that's in that public space all the time. It becomes this extra behind the scenes layer for an artist studio or for kind of public art spaces. And so it's been really interesting to see how it attributes value to materials within those structures or for the parts of a whole, which has been really kind of insightful, but also hilarious.
One thing that Carol's point can really help with is I feel kind of icky showing student writing to students and then critiquing it, right? Even with student permission, it then raises for students the idea that they could be critiqued in front of another class. And if I ask to use it for them, it might be a negative thing. So usually when I use student writing, I want to point to positives or how could we make something even stronger? This is a great way for generating examples that I can just tear to pieces and say what's wrong with this? What's not working? I have no guilt about that. It was ChatGPT who made it. The feelings are not going to get hurt. We'll be fine. So there's that as well. And then in the back, I'm sorry.
Well, I mean, a lot of you seem really familiar with ChatGPT. The first time I only heard about it, or I came to realize it existed a few months ago when I got a paper from a student. It seemed plagiarized, but plagiarized from maniacal sources. It was kind of right. She had no way of knowing it, or it was strange. And then I came to understand, but I come to you with a lot of ignorance. And this question comes from that ignorance. And you said just now, it's almost like ChatGPT is like talking to your roommate, bouncing it. But I thought, and I understand we're talking about the different styles of responses we get, but I thought that content-wise, ChatGPT was like hooked into the internet like Google and had access to anything ever written about. So so your roommate doesn't know everything, you know. And I seemed like this was something where I could go and I wanted to write a paper of my own to say, I'm going to write about these movies and I want to analyze what people said about them. And it would tell me pretty much anything. Now, is that wrong? Is it more like a roommate than a scholar?
It's more like a roommate who has Google, and maybe be pretty quick at it, right? Through 2021.
Right.
It gets cut off at certain points. The other thing is, don't feel bad about not knowing about it until a few months ago. ChatGPT 3.5, which is really the one we're wrestling with, was released in November, late November. I mean, this is really, really recent stuff. And it was a huge leap when it went to 3.5 where it could do this stuff, and really looked a lot more like it knew what it's talking about. Anybody else want to touch on that? And then we'll go over here and then over there. On, is it like your roommate? Is it like your roommate with Google? Is it something more complex than that? And I think maybe, Jerry, your point is like, it's like neither. It's like rolling the dice and predicting what word's going to come next. Don't trick yourself into thinking it actually knows anything. It doesn't know anything. No, it makes, if you ask it to cite sources, it will make up sources.
It doesn't. You look at the DOIs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're not things.
Yeah.
You can also convince it to change its mind about the meaning of 10.
Yeah. Sorry? Yeah. And then it'll work with that for the next.
Well, there is plugin to side and with that.
It gives into suggestion very strong.
It's also very apologetic. I would say, I want a 5-point thing that says this. You gave me 4. I actually wanted 5. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I gave you 4. I have failed you. David.
Thanks for this fantastic panel. And I have a sort of general comment, but also actually a professor for I have a profession for Professor Bontrager about programming. But I do think that I do have every faith that AI eventually is going to be capable of is going to evolve. Like you said, this came out in late November. I mean, 10, 15 years from now, I do have every faith that it will be able to accomplish just about any human task. And I do think that the more complicated the algorithms become, and solving the problem of sequencing versus simultaneous thinking, which is a huge difference between human thinking and computers and coding. Everything is sequential, and that gets to question. But I do think and the big question for us as educators as to what's the purpose of an education if it's not to make people produce work. If the work, because that's always what we seem to be doing with majors, and we're equipping people for careers to do work and spend their lives doing work. And a lot of this, I think AI is going to wind up doing a lot of this work and making the necessity of human work, more minuscule. So I think it should hope. I mean, that's something I'm constantly thinking about. What is the future of education? But part of it is that difference of right now, ChatGPT can be comical and some of the things that it produces under these other algorithms because of they have these fatal flaws or they have a certain thing that's missing to them that seems so crucial to humanity, and so that we can kind of mock it. But part of it is this that the way of thinking, like the project you discussed, that wound up becoming that was delayed every 3 years and then it just fizzled out because it's impossible to get the human experience down because we have to report it sequentially. And when you take this, it's almost like a one-dimensional thing. Even the algorithms, spin off in different directions, but still coding and commands. I mean, they function sequentially, and human thinking. So we can hop around, right now we're hopping around all over the place in thought, and, you know, and it's, that's something that's a hallmark of human existence and human expression, and so the question actually kind of about the program, the languages that you talked about, that you said that one had like was nodal, right, and had a patch system, like where you can create a little sort of eddy of code and kind of attach it to the whole algorithm, and it would work, and it gives problems to programs that are more sequential. I'm interested in how did we get from that, from the sequential to that nodal, and is that something, is that a direction that where maybe where AI would become more complex and start to mimic the human much more effectively?
Yeah, it becomes an interesting problem. Thank you, by the way, for this great lead into this question. That was a really great idea, your considerations of education. I share a lot of this concern and interest too. But I guess a good catch-all term for that would be less like nodal coding, but visual scripting. It's used a lot in various software engines. It's not anything that's new particularly, but it does create, I think, or it's designed to create an easier entry point for a novice user or an introductory user, because it offers up a very human system where, oh, I understand building things with Lego. I understand that I can place a block here and connect it to this block, and that will cause this to be, in effect to each other. However, that causes just kind of a different level of chaos in a generative language system, because you have the opportunity to create your code-based system out of order. You can throw things in and quickly connect multiple things to each other without necessarily seeing those ramifications immediately. In the same way that if I forget to add a comma or something in a linear code structure, I don't necessarily have that that level of feedback. And so it's right now it's similar to how some important governmental systems, at least in the US, are air gapped, essentially, where they're not connected to the internet, or similar reasons where like we have this information that is designed for our use and our use alone. We don't want to particularly connect that to an outside source that is unknown. And so with visual scripting or different things right now, it's really great to feel like you understand that, you can read the documentation, you can troubleshoot it with students or with other artists in a way that is not necessarily easily helped. It also has certainly informed the direction for a few projects that I've helped out, where I've been either hired on to assist other artists or help out with market projects because they are dedicated to using visual scripting systems and they cannot rely upon language models that could solve that problem very quickly for a cost of $0. And so it becomes like a possible career path, at least in the short term, where if you can start to kind of understand how some of those non-linear systems work, it offers up kind of some interesting possibilities. And so for right now, as I showed in a couple of those slides, if there is documentation available for a linear-based object-oriented coding language, ChatGPT and other generative language models can be really helpful for identifying maybe something you'd like to work on or contribute to a project. Or if you do get an error, I've had maybe like 50% success rate sending that error to ChatGPT and saying, hey, I just got this error from your example. And then it gets very apologetic. Oh, I'm so sorry, try this. And I didn't include a slide for a ChatGPT entry that was way too long, but it was with visual scripting, where I said that didn't work. And I connected it just like you said. What did I do wrong? And trying to be just as apologetic as the model, and kind of playing the game, because what could be more human than be apologetic and trying to be kind of sneaking in under that guise of humor and sadness that makes us want to help with something. And so, it just became like me apologizing to a thing that's apologizing to me and sharing things like, well, I said, oh, I found the solution. Can you try this? And I'll send it, like what I did. And it says, oh, that's interesting. It's clear it can't change the model because it's locked in. So it just kind of starts throwing back, positive comments and support, and it'll say, good luck with your project. That might have been on one of the slides, I think. Good luck, let me know if I can help, or it'll remember things as, we said it in the chat where it'll say something 3 days later, how did your workshop go? And, it's like this weird friend that you aren't gonna have coffee with more than once. Because they don't know about you, it was an interesting meeting. But thank you, I'll pass. I'm busy that day. And so it's probably a departure from your original question. But at the moment, when you get into that area of code languages or code-based languages that have clearly been designed for a human user, they've really started to fail, or at least at the moment are failing in the face of something that's designed to predict your next move, when your next move in a node-based system is literally dragging the line that could connect to various elements, and that gets too organic for it to begin to make that prediction, especially in visual scripting languages where I can just move things around and cram them together and smash all the objects together and move them out of my sight because that was a sketch that I don't want to use. So you can have these multiple ideas, almost like Miro. If anybody uses Miro, becomes like, how would you predict what you would do in Miro, which is really hard to understand.
So I think part of the answer to the question is about that nodal logic being around the visual interface itself, right? It's not actually breaking the sequentiality. The other part is, I think a little bit of what you're talking about is modularity and extensibility. So you can look into both of those, how you break these problems down into different pieces that can then be removed, have different plugin go over here. But the last, I think the core of this was around automation itself and the threat, not to education, but more broadly to society itself. And my quick 2-second answer to that would be that the threat is not automation. It's what capitalism does with automation. In other words, if my entire job gets replaced by a machine, that sounds great. I don't like my job all the time. I'll go do whatever I want. It's my paycheck getting replaced by the machine. It's my healthcare getting replaced by the machine that I don't like. So in a world where everything could be automated, wouldn't we just live in a great post-scarcity utopia? And we all know that the answer is currently no. And these are issues that we're going to need to think about within the next decade, and they're coming very quickly. We got one last question, and then we'll have to get out of here. Maybe we'll save that.
So I kind of wanted to give a student perspective. So I'm doing an assignment, and I'm like an AB undergrad student. I get good grades, but I do the assignment and then I put that assignment in and it gives a better answer than I did. And all I have to do is maybe put an and or a the, or maybe capitalize something, put a period there. How am I supposed to not feel like I should be using this? Because it gives better answers than I do, and I already give good answers. I already get hundreds, but then it's giving the better answers to me. I'm like, that's really good. You almost said almost the exact same thing I just said, but better. And then that is plagiarizing, right? That is plagiarism. So why it makes me feel kind of bad. You're saying, you said there was a challenge. Your students were challenged by the AI model, but it's almost like this, if the AI can do better than them, what's the point of us doing these times?
Yes, actually, one of the students asked a short question. It was not a question, kind of explanation, and then that puts me probably understood as well. Center crisis. Yeah, I'm still giving an answer to the question. The students who referred to and made the monologue, and why are we here? When she said, why are we here? So I was thinking about, I was trying to translate it here. Here could be classroom, here could be physical, freaking target, university, or even society. Here could be everything, everything. Then in terms of the students' sense of guilt or irresponsibility by using AI in any ways. So as of now, my response or my way of being free for activities to just open everything, invite them to use it. And then, like I said, ask my students to record where they started with the AI generation model. So that way students doesn't have to feel guilty, that they can learn how to use it efficiently more ethically. But the thing really hit me was as an instructor who teaches competition, or even let's say I'm Korean, if I can teach Korean as a foreign language, so many companies are already incorporating AI tools. So they are replacing foreign language teacher instructors in terms of affordability and the price and ethically. The essential crisis is here, at least to me. And then I was picturing maybe at some point all the higher ups or the who are running the universities who are so keen money-wise, and they figure that instead of hiring 4 competition instructors, instead of hiring 4 instructors who teach foreign language, why don't we just hire 1 person who knows how exactly efficiently use AI tool? So that way they can run online course just with 1 person. These are the things that really drive me. But these concerns stem from my students' very candid response to the same issue.
I would say, as a teacher, I would be asking, okay, what did you learn from that? Like when you say what is better, what does it do that you think is better? And trying to maybe use it as like a cognitive process to be able to identify what better actually means. Was it more succinct? Was it more clear? What is it? And then how do I like learn how to do that? Do you see what I mean? So I would probably having them do process memos along with it, that if you're going to use it in this way, what are you learning from the process of interacting with it? So you become a more critical thinker with it. I think teaching writing has always been difficult. And I think the thing that my students initially think is, you're going to teach me how to write. And I was like, ooh, that's like a losing game, because I can't predict every situation that you're ever going to go through, but I will help you learn how to think and ask questions for all these different ways, so that when you enter a new writing situation that you did not practice with me, that you hear your voice asking questions that are going to help you deduce what you need to be able to do in that, and then how to use feedback to craft it in that specific situation, because I can't predict where you're going to all end up. Right. And like I think it's like they get to that point of Spencer, because I'm scared of like, I hear your voice asking these questions. I'm like, I'm waiting for you to hear your voice asking certain types of questions so that you can then be able to do it. And I think that AI, if I were trying to use it in that way, I'd be trying to help them see this is a tool that you could go back to be able to refine to give the best output they need.
Well, concern about plagiarism, it's only plagiarism if you submit it as your own work and don't indicate as such, right? So if you submitted your work and then you said, oh, by the way, I've also rented AI and it's looking up as well, your teacher will probably appreciate that. That you're being thoughtful about the assignments, you're measuring your ideas against another response. Also the process cognitive work.
Yeah, it's kind of funny. The teacher that I'm submitting the assignment for had said, like, don't go through ChatGPT because like it's going to give you nonsense. And like I finished the assignment, like, and I done the assignment. I was like looking at this one question. I was like, maybe I could write this better. And so I just put it in. It's like a 1-sentence thing, and it gave me almost exactly what I had said. And I was like, this is just a little more succinct. Like you were saying, like I had bullet points for everything. I'm like, oh, that would have been really good to look at it in that way. And it's almost interesting. I kind of want to go to that professor and be like, hey, like I did the work, but like look at what this did. Like, what if other students?
And they really should know that. They should hear that. I mean, it depends on the relationship you have with that professor. But as faculty was my students, I would appreciate being corrected in that way. Because that's another approach to generalization. That's not true.
I think it's going to become reciprocal in a relationship, and that we taught the AI how to write about writing, and now that AI is teaching you back how to write, and then you're going to respond. Like it's an interesting
Where does that feedback loop lead? Because I think what we've been doing is not just teaching the AI to write like these students, but we've spent your entire life before AI teaching you how to write like AI. Right? We've taught you 5-paragraph essays. We've taught you bullet points. We've taught you the most boring ways to write as possible and to eliminate yourself from the writing as much as possible.
Yeah.
And these are failures that have been pointed at for over 100 years. I mean, these are things that people in composition theory and in writing studies have been talking about. These are not new problems. Like, we know that you called it better. And I think the problem is that we've called it better when your presence is better, right? You existing is better than having it come out of a machine. But we've taught you that that's the word for it. And I think that's part of what we need to change. One last thought, and I'll have to end. We're about 10 minutes over right now.
So as a student who's going to be entering the workforce in like 5 years, with AI growing as quickly as it is, how can I prepare myself to not only compete with AI, being able to do the same thing I can do, but also work with it?
I think we can't compete with it.
Yeah, I think
If it's going to do the same, how can Go players compete, right?
You can compete with it by doing things that the AI can't do. So it can't be as creative as you. You need to figure out ways to be more creative, do things in a different way. And a 5-paragraph essay is not a creative thing. So you create. Yeah.
that's gonna be. The thing is that with this technology, the idea of the actual creativity is being under modification and then redefined. So we don't know how far we can stick to the traditional idea of authorship. How could you argue, how could you claim your contribution to the essay, which was assisted by AI? And how, as a teacher or employer, or even out of the school, customer doesn't care. As far as they can use good materials, good product with the lower cost, more entertaining way. So I don't know, I'm in the same position with you. What I'm trying to do, I'm trying to read it, how this trend goes, and I'm trying to read and understand how the third parties are approaching to AI, generative AI technology, what kind of product, what kind of environment they are trying to create. They move silently. It's hard.
Because I have a way to keep my value as like a worker, and like a mind.
You could carry a little internet jammer in your pocket. To the interview, and they say like, ChatGPT isn't working, and you say, I can help you with this problem.
This is actually close to what I was going to say, which is computers are great at solving problems, right? Humans are great at causing problems. And I don't just mean that in the sense of breaking it this way. Learn to cause problems. Learn to see the issues that are there. I think computer science is actually a great place for you to be, and I don't know if you're there, but thinking about how to hack the machines, how to work against them, how to see the gaps, the things that they're missing, right? Whatever beautiful utopian future computers could make for us, we will screw up. And that is part of our beauty. That is one of the things that's actually, you have value in. Computers cannot be as dumb as us. There you go.
But isn't it really about asking the right questions?
Yeah.
Prompt whisperer.
We're looking that up.
Play with it, find out what ChatGPT can't do, and there's your answer. Right? That's it. That's the answer for the next couple of years.
Tell me you learned.
The next issue.
Thank you all. Please fill out that form, tell us your thoughts. We'd love to hear what faculty think about ChatGPT and large language models. Yeah.